Warning: this video will contain spoilers. Viewer discretion is advised. Dialogue tends to be unappreciated in games. Usually, it's not noticed unless something is off. For example, bad writing, awkward grammar, or horrible localization. When it's good, it's often missed and packaged with either a character or the game's plot before being criticized. A common way for good dialogue to be recognized is through voice acting. But even then, what's recognized is the voice acting performance, not the writing. For this video, I want to look into the dialogue of one of the game's most crucial characters, Princess Garnet. She, in my opinion, is special due to her background and the situations she's put in-game. These affect how she talks in-game, and I want to take a look into it since it is subtly used to show progress in her character. Before I proceed, I want to mention a few things. First, I'm only talking about the game's English version. This is important because Japanese and English have a fair share of differences which doesn't translate easily, if not at all, with each other. Also, I don't know Japanese. Second, I have no idea how good the game's localization is. This leads to my third point, which is I had a stupidly hard time trying to make this video. I almost wanted to tear my hair out with my previous approach when I started. This is why I used the word subtle in the thumbnail and in the intro. Depending on how you view it, Garnet's dialogue can be all over the goddamn place. If you look too much into it like I did at the start, it's as if the rules on levels of formality isn't practiced consistently. There were contractions and just better words to use in some of her lines where she is supposed to be formal or royal. So instead of bashing my head on my computer desk, I decided to use a different approach. Basically, instead of just staring at the script, I also took into consideration how the game expects us to hear her when she talks based on the situation. That way, things can be more consistent and I could keep on pretending that there's at least some minute objectivity in a video that is actually subjective. Regardless, I might still be overthinking this and could be wrong, so please feel free to correct me in the comments section. Time for some quick context. Garnet is the Princess of Alexandria, a kingdom found in the Mist Continent. At the start of the game, she attempts to run away from home in hopes of reaching Lindblum to get help from her uncle, Regent Sid. But things turn south, leaving her and our band of heroes to take the long way to Lindblum. On the way to the village of Dali, our protagonist Zidane convinces Garnet to hide her identity since she is technically a wanted person. She also suggests that she should also learn how to speak casually. This becomes the starting point of the shift in Garnet's tone in speech. Let me also say that I love what the developers do here. Most games at the time also had their fair share of royalty as part of the playable cast, but it's just a title that they carry throughout the game and it has barely any impact. While FF9 also has that issue to some degree, at least the plot goes out of its way to go around it. The majority of Disc 1 involves a slow shift in how Garnet talks. I think a good 75% of the game is her talking in a formal way, while the remaining 25% involves the slow and subtle shift to a semi-formal tone if not fully casual. It's also in this portion of the game where it tries to create a pattern or a model of when Garnet uses a formal or semi-formal level of speech. Basically, if the topic or situation involves her royal background, she would usually have a formal and royal tone. But if it doesn't, like say conversing with the party or just hanging around, then she uses a semi-formal or casual tone. That said, emphasis on slow shift because it doesn't really happen all that much. This is supplemented by the fact that she has to learn how to talk casually. The best example is her ATs in Dali. First is Dagger Tries, where she talks with an old lady at the farm. This ADE shows that Dagger isn't aware of the more common words people use like crops, and that what is normal and weird for her doesn't immediately apply to commoners. Second is Dagger Tries Harder, where she gets to observe firsthand the conversation between two common folk. The actual shift happens near the end of Disc 1 when Steiner and Garnet are in Southgate. Garnet convinces Steiner to avoid calling her princess so that they can get to Alexandria faster. Garnet speaks in a more casual tone than usual, making good use of the things she learned along the way. What's funny is that she even gets Steiner to talk casually and is given advice by Garnet to some extent. I personally find this a good attention to detail. It shows the growth in Garnet in all aspects and subtly shows that the way she speaks is indeed changing. In Disc 2, I'd argue that this is where Garnet talks more casually or semi-formally. There are only a few events that involve Alexandria or her royal background, and for the most part, the game focuses on other characters involved. That said, the game does continue where Dagger's travel left off with her and Steiner accidentally bumping into Marcus and Cinna. It's weirdly funny to see Steiner immediately go back to formal speech while she tries to talk to Marcus and Cinna casually, something which Marcus points out later. Anyways, this leads to a detour to Treno where she still talks casually. However, that is all dropped once they meet Dr. Todd, who used to be her tutor. It makes sense that she addresses him formally considering their history. Dr. Todd sees Garnet as Princess Garnet and not as Dagger. It makes sense in context. The formal tone would arguably continue until she gets rescued by Zidane and their arrival at the now destroyed Lindblum. It's only in their travels to and in the outer continent where she arguably uses a casual tone while talking with the party. This all changes in their return trip to the IFA tree where the party meets Kuja. In Garnet's conversation with Kuja, you can kinda see and tell that she's addressing him in an assertive tone. She even introduces her name in full, further giving us hints that she is addressing him as royalty. The royal tone further solidifies thanks to the upcoming series of events such as Kuja's fight with Bran, the Queen's death, and her being put on the throne. Disc 3, in my opinion, is the most interesting and unique in terms of Garnet's speech. That's because there's actually 3 speech types for her in this part of the game, and I'd even argue that there is a smooth progression in how she talks unlike the previous discs where it's kinda all over the place. That said, it does make sense why it's like that in the previous parts of the game because of context. Anyways, Garnet starts Disc 3 with her usual formal tone. This makes sense since she is to be coronated as the Queen of Alexandria. She's finally home again and is surrounded by the people of the kingdom, those who mostly see her as soon-to-be Queen Garnet, not so much as Dagger. The game even goes as far as to call her Garnet at a certain point. Cool detail. But things go south as Alexandria is attacked and gets destroyed. This leaves Garnet in emotional turmoil and mute for certain parts of the game. You might be thinking, how is silence another speech type or speech design for her? Well, like I said at the start of the video, we also have to take into consideration the context behind what is said, or in this case, what's not said. It makes sense for her to be speechless since she had to deal with a lot in a short amount of time. The death of her mother, her sudden coronation, then the destruction of her kingdom. A lot has been taken away from her. It also doesn't help that she was already having some major doubts about herself and her actions. And if that doesn't convince you, then think of it this way. Silence can mean more than speech. It can have a big impact depending on the situation. The lack of speech on Garnet's part is there to cement that she is in turmoil, that she has a lot on her mind. It has more raw emotion to it than seeing her cry or mope, and if anything, it lets her actions speak louder than what her words can convey. Thankfully, Garnet will be able to talk again sometime later with more vigor and more peace in her heart. She talks a bit more casual than usual and even makes mention of how she was back then. But in the end, all is well and the party continues on their journey. Before I continue to the last disc, I want to point out a few things. First is that I love how despite being this far into the game, it shows that Dagger still doesn't know a few things like girl talk. It's really cute. Second, but more importantly, is I want to talk about Dagger's lines or speech in nearly everyone's favorite part, Zidane's You're Not Alone. It's in this part that I think Dagger is the most casual, or rather the most sincere and warmest. It's no secret that there's something more between Zidane and Garnet, and I just appreciate the lines in this part. How Dagger talks with so much familiarity about someone, something that can't properly be said in a formal level, or at least will be lost in translation. I know this has nothing to do with levels of formality or lines in context, but I don't know, this part is really memorable for me in terms of how she speaks or addresses someone. I might be stretching it, but I think this is the peak of Dagger's subtle growth represented by the way she speaks. While it makes sense that bonds and friendship are formed during their travels, I couldn't imagine Disc 1 or Disc 2 Dagger talking like this. If anything, this is proof that she has come a long way since the start of the game. While there's obvious growth and progression in her, this minute detail helps in sealing the deal. And if you really need more proof, then how about this part of their evacuation of Terra, where she's more straightforward and bolder than her resident lover boy. Time for the final part of the game, and this is more straightforward than the previous ones. There's barely any change in how she talks despite Memoria showing recaps of what happened so far. You'd think that seeing the destruction of Alexandria again, or Zidane seeing a memory of her mom, would do that considering those are very near and dear topics to her, but nope, this is the exception. The final time we'll ever see Dagger talk in such a casual or semi-formal tone is during her farewell to Zidane outside the IFA tree. Plus points for Zidane actually addressing her formally. That simple action adds weight not only to the scene but in how Dagger addresses him. Garnet's final lines will be near the final scenes of the ending where she speaks in such a wistful and nostalgic tone. At this point, she's already been on the throne for some time and has more or less gone back to how she used to talk, formal and royal. But that soon all falls apart thanks to a certain reveal at the end. I honestly believe that Garnet's writing is a good example of how dialogue and lines can aid in the development of a character. I admit that some parts could have been written better and that I myself have nitpicked at certain points. But I don't think that diminishes the effect of her speech design. If anything, I want other games to implement things like this in the future. It gives characters more personality, in turn making them more memorable. Garnet also proves that the lack of speech has a heavy impact and shows more than what a character can convey. However, it has to be done in proper scenarios so it doesn't lose its impact unless you want the return of speech to lose its meaning. I hope that more games take into consideration the lines and speech design of characters, not only writing properly structured lines, but also to help the character fit in the long run. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.